Most countries around the world have either introduced or are piloting different aspects of program-based budgeting right now. And we know that in our region, more than half of governments are currently supporting PBB reforms. For UNICEF, this is critical to our agenda because we know that this reform in particular helps governments better plan and spend their resources to deliver very specific results. And I think even more importantly, we know that as this reform is being introduced in many countries, it typically starts in the education and health ministries or sectors before moving to other parts of government. And for us, that is a huge opportunity to make sure that we're selecting the right program criteria, activities, targets, and indicators, and so on. Now, most of the participants, I'm quite sure, don't need to be convinced about the utility of PBB, but I think it's useful just to identify some of the key reasons for why governments around the world are giving so much attention to this reform right now. Clearly, it has a huge impact in terms of connecting policy strategies to budgets, resources, and ultimately results. Huge value add in that space. A second big reason is it just helps governments to be able to better prioritize scarce resources. So helping with the annual budget process, as well as looking towards the medium-term expenditure framework and other longer-term planning processes. Lots of utility in that space. Transparency and accountability. Right now, perhaps more than ever, global attention is shining on our region for two big reasons. First is around the growing debt and the need to be very transparent about what we owe to who and the different terms. But at the same time, as we have lots of emergency funding flowing in, as we have new special drawing rights allocated from the IMF, new emergency donor funds, and so on, there's a huge demand right now for greater transparency and accountability across spending, and program-based budgeting has big contributions towards this end. And just a point from UNICEF, for us, as we're able to look at the budget across specific programs, this has immense value to help us understand what resources are actually going to benefit services for children. And so for us, another huge area of importance. Clearly, a lot of reforms are taking place around the region, and there's been some very, I think, success stories as well as a lot of challenges. And one of the things we need to answer is, what are those enabling factors? Why have some countries and some sectors or ministries done so well and others not so well? Also, we want to try to understand what have been some of the factors that have made this reform partially easy to implement in some places, and in other places it's been a massive challenge, especially moving from central to subnational levels. We've had a taste of some of the broader benefits, but do the benefits outweigh all of the costs in terms of rolling out PBB reforms? And as we look towards the future, the next steps, where we go from here, what is kind of the unfinished business for governments that have begun to start with PBB, and what do we need to do to incentivize other governments to really look at this reform seriously? So that's a nice segue into really the broader objectives of today's discussion and debate. We want to reflect on the good and the bad of this reform within Eastern and Southern Africa. We want to learn from some of the good practices and lessons learned, and hopefully we can identify some specific areas on how we can catalyze progress going forward to really make sure that we get the most out of this strategic reform. In terms of the agenda, shortly I'm going to pass the floor over to Neil Cole, who is the Executive Director of CAVRI, and he's going to give us just a quick summary overview, the state of play of program-based budgeting in the region right now. After his presentation, I will help facilitate a hopefully lively, robust debate and discussion, which will give us a chance to reflect and probe on the current state of play. So please already begin to jot down some questions and reflections as Neil goes through his presentation. And following that, we will segue into country experiences where we have, I think, a really exciting opportunity to learn from Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, and Rwanda on different aspects of the reforms and giving a very candid perspective of what's going well and what's not going well. That will then follow by a moderated discussion by Joanna Bento, who's also with CAVRI. And then at the very end, Neil and myself will offer some very quick concluding remarks. So ladies and gentlemen, again, a tremendous warm welcome on behalf of CAVRI and UNICEF to today's event. We're very excited for a lively discussion, and I now have the great pleasure to pass the virtual floor over to Neil Cole. So Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And like Matthew, I am also in Nairobi at the moment. I've had meetings with the National Treasury and also the Kenyan Revenue Authority. So from CAVRI, a warm welcome to everyone. And it's also good to see so many familiar names, and hopefully at some point also see some familiar faces. And also I see there are some people that I last saw, they were public servants, and now I see that they've become international development diplomats, if one can call them that, Motena. I'm going to speak in my presentation more from the perspective of a practitioner. I mean, for those that don't know, I mean, I started my career in the Ministry of Finance in South Africa in the Budget Office as the Director of Budget Reform. So my, suppose, hand is evident in the program-based budgeting reforms in South Africa. So I'm going to be speaking a lot from that perspective, which is one of design and also the impact and what it takes to implement program-based budgeting. But before I do that, I'm going to ask my colleague Priya to share with you a short video that we developed a couple of years ago that I think speaks to program-based budgeting, medium-term expenditure frameworks, but more broadly, some of the challenges that countries go through when implementing these big reforms. Thank you, Priya.
Okomo's Quest. In the Republic of Maendeleo, Missouri, we have Minister of Finance John Wangai, Budget Director Simon Okomo, Chief Financial Officer Mr. Owiti, Desk Officer in the Ministry of Finance for Education, Sport and Culture Andika Raila, Principal Secretary for Health, Desk Officer in the Ministry of Finance, Health Mary Were. Recently, in the Office of the Finance Minister of the Republic of Maendeleo, Missouri, Budget Director Okomo discusses this year's budget finalization with Minister Wangai.
I'm sorry for that interruption, Simon. Minister Abazi is not happy about the piles of budget paperwork officials must do. What is going on?
It is medium-term performance-based budgeting, Minister.
What is that? And why do I not know about it?
My apologies, Minister. It was all set out in our PFM reform strategy, which, Minister, you have seen and signed off. It is so we can link budgets to policy priorities, Minister. Ministries must develop budget programs and performance targets and cost spending for 3 years, justified against their strategic plans. The idea is to force ministries to budget better, and we'll be able to assess their requests and track their performance better. The effectiveness of our allocations will improve, and that, Minister, is exactly what we need to do.
Minister Wangai does not look convinced, but before he can object,
it was recommended as best practice by the multi-donor PFM task force. A renowned international consultant did the concept paper last year, and the new PFM advisor helped develop the templates. The ministries have had 5 months to prepare, and we've set up structures with them for it. It is a change budget process, Minister. Now it's about funding results, not just blind funding of costs and institutions.
Meanwhile, at the Ministry of Sport and Culture,
Mr. Owiti, Ms. Rayla from Finance has called. She asked how long the budget submission will still be. The deadline is today, she says.
Check with Madam Adidi in the PS's office. She's writing the new narrative that the Finance Ministry wants. I need that to complete. And it would help if I did not need to invent this performance stuff. Where is my old budget process?
And at the Ministry of Health,
I'm almost done with the budget submission, PS. It's very long and complex this year with all the new requirements. Thankfully, that donor consultant completed the sector plan on time and helped us. I used a lot from it.
We should probably have reconvened that group finance set up, but I just don't believe finance will act differently. They'll just argue about line items, make arbitrary cuts, and fund the powerful ministries, as always, and we'll have wasted all the efforts.
1 month later, in the corridors of the Ministry of Finance.
Wow, you know the budget meeting is tomorrow. How far are your recommendations, Mary?
I have to find another 3.6 million feeder to fit in the ceiling, Andika. I think I'll just need to cut across the non-utility line items. That is where the fat was in the past.
With some anxiety, Mary remembers the email sent by Director Okomo the previous day, outlining the fiscal framework for 2016 and its implications for the line ministries. Little did Director Okomo know that things are easier instructed than done.
Did you use the new budget submissions in your assessment, like the director said?
Between us, I tried, but it was gobbledygook to me on the volume of paper. I understand feeder and cents and how divisions use money, but putting it in programs is just confusing.
Director Okomo overhears. A few days later, Director Okomo is confronted with further evidence that his reform might not be the game changer he had hoped.
But Mr. President, these proposals have not been part of the budget process so far, or turned down. And it is a very tight year. Yes, Mr. President. I understand, Mr. President. I will instruct my team to find funds for Minister Abazi's international conference and renovating State House. Goodbye, Mr. President.
Yet, on budget day, Director Okomo was almightily pleased with the new comprehensive budget documentation and expected great things to come from it. But even in this, Director Okomo would be sorely disappointed. His greatest disappointment, though, was the next year, when he realized that no one used the forward budgets as a base for the new year for financial or performance information. Little had changed really, except the volume of paper, and that had mere compliance written all over it. Sadly, his budget policy link seemed somehow further away. Director Okomo, however, is not that easily defeated. In a rush of energy and optimism, he sets off to set up a workshop with ministries and his team to identify what went wrong and fix it. What should he do?
Thank you, Priya. And I think many of you are faced or have been faced with that question of what should be done. Those who are embarking on major reforms like medium-term expenditure frameworks or program-based budgeting, I'm sure you can relate to a lot of what is expressed in this video. And then to end up after several years of attempting a reform, to end up with the reform not really achieving its objectives and merely being, as described in the video, as a compliance exercise. So as I was preparing my presentation, I came across quite an interesting quote. And it is a quote by, I suppose, many who are working on budget reforms would consider to be the father of program-based budgeting. And it's sort of written in a bit of an old style English, where the person says, among the new men in the nascent program and performance budgeting staffs and the fellow travelers who have joined the bandwagon, the mood is of a revolutionary development in the history of government management. So it sort of like goes on and it refers to this new mood, that the change that was being spoken of was going to be a revolutionary development. It was going to deliver all kinds of benefits. There would be very hard decisions that are going to be taken based on the appraisals that are undertaken of past budgets, and then the setting of objectives, and that alternative sources of financing was going to be explored. that we'll have multi-year budget forecasts that would be set up. And what was being described here by Professor Alan Schick, who I consider to be, one of those fathers of program-based budgeting, was he was describing the excitement around the implementation of program-based budgeting. But I think what is quite important to also know is that this was said in December 1966. So program-based budgeting may be a new reform in your country, but it's certainly not a new reform globally. Right? I mean, this is a reform that has been around for a very long time, and the kind of promises that the reform is meant to deliver on are pretty much similar to the promises that many of your countries that are embarking on this reform, many of the promises that you are being sold. And just to say, it was good meeting up with Professor Alan Schick a couple of years ago, and yeah, I mean, we spent some time speaking about South Africa, where he came on a fairly regular basis to lecture and to train us on program-based budgeting, to link up with him a couple of years ago, and to also speak about program-based budgeting. And some of what I'm going to mention in my presentation, especially around the challenges and the way forward, is taken from not only my experiences, but also from those conversations that I've had with Professor Alan Schick about program-based budgeting. So I think a good place to start is to think about the public financial management system, right? Because we think about this reform as a budget reform, and we think about budgeting as being located within the public financial management sphere. And if these reforms are meant to be contributing towards more functional public financial management systems, let's then examine what we mean by a functional public financial management system. Well, firstly, it has to order the manner that governments raise and spend money. It ensures that prudent decision-making prioritizes spending. And these are some of the more obvious points that I'm sure many of you have been thinking about in terms of what a functional public finance management system should look like or does look like. It also supports an outcome where financial resources lead to service delivery and actual results. I suppose the most important of what it is that we do. And then presents opportunities to improve value for money. And value for money, if we think of it as measurements of economy, efficiency, effectiveness, equity, as well as ethical behavior, then it cuts across the entire public finance management spectrum. And then lastly, it should hold public officials accountable for all aspects of their performance. And when we think about program-based budgeting, and in terms of the definition that was set out, or description that was set out by Matthew, then program-based budgeting and the performance aspect as well, where that is introduced, should contribute to greater functionality by supporting all of the above, right? In the way that money is ordered, in the way that prudent decisions are made, in the support of outcomes, in achieving service delivery, present opportunities for value for money, because we are able to measure an allocation that has been made to a program, and we have a set of indicators to measure the performance of that program. And then very importantly, it holds those public officials, or in this case, it holds those program managers to account for their performance. And as I've said, and maybe it's not the way that we often think about program-based budgeting, and this is one of the points that Professor Alan Schick once made, is that he said, the problem with program-based budgeting is that we've been thinking of it too much as a budget reform, whereas we should be thinking of it as a all of public sector reform that covers all aspects of our planning, budgeting, execution, evaluation. So if we think of, starting off at the budget circular, it is the budget office that would have to distribute or issue a circular that would describe a uniform format to be used in preparing the budget. It would define the reform and may also include, in most cases, the ceilings for each of the programs where program-based budgeting is already in place. I had a look at Rwanda's budget circular recently, and when Rwanda announced that they were moving to performance-based budgeting, sort of off the base of program-based budgeting, it was that budget circular that made that announcement, and then also described some of the changes to be made. In the way that we prepare a budget, if we are introducing program-based budgeting, we now have to think of not the Ministry of Finance that sits there and prepares the allocations to programs and sub-programs. It is now the program managers that sit in the line ministries that prepare budget proposals for their programs and sub-programs. So if you were to think of a program like maternal health, for instance, it's not going to be the Ministry of Finance that is going to be preparing the budget inputs, financial and non-financial information for a program such as maternal health. It's going to have to be the program manager that is responsible for the preparation of that. So that causes quite a major shift within the public service in the way that a budget is prepared. And then in terms of the formulation of the budget, it will be working off a baseline of a program and a sub-program where this has already been introduced. I would imagine that where it's introduced for the first time, that there may be an exercise that is undertaken jointly by the Ministry of Finance and line ministries to determine what the baseline should be for all programs and sub-programs. And that can be quite an extensive exercise. Any new funding requests that's based on a new program that's being introduced, and also increases in outputs of existing programs, will need to first come from the way that the budget is prepared in the line ministry. And then in terms of the approval, so certain legislation, and one of the conditions, let me say, of program-based budgeting is that there is an organic budget law in place. And that organic budget law will also prescribe the format that the budget is going to be tabled in Parliament. And in the case of one that I'm familiar with, which is South Africa, well, at least more familiar with, is that the law says that the budget must be tabled per main division within a vote. And what it means there is that the budget must be tabled as a program-based budget, because Parliament's going to appropriate amounts to a vote per program, right? What that then means is that spending is authorized per program and sub-programs. And the implication of that is that when spending happens, program managers are the ones that are given the authority to spend against program allocations. And any shifts that then take place between programs and sub-programs are then governed firstly by the appropriation, and then Secondly, in terms of the percentages that can be shifted. Right? And then in terms of the evaluation, and this is where independent audits are being undertaken, that those independent audits are now also getting themselves up, bringing on additional capacity to not only look at the numbers that have been spent within the program, but also looking at the performance indicators of the programs. So the point that I think is important to take away here is that program-based budgeting is not just something that you're going to be able to design and implement from the Ministry of Finance. Program-based budgeting is an all-of-government reform, and probably more important that those program managers that are responsible for the programs in each of the ministries, departments, and maybe even agencies are going to be held responsible for, right? So what does program-based budgeting look like, or what may it look like? Well, one of the advantages of program-based budgeting, which Matthew set out, is that it does describe things, right? So if your ministry is a ministry of basic education, from the onset, it describes what the programs are. It shows what the allocations are going to be, and where you have a medium-term expenditure framework in place, it will show what the allocations are over the next 3 years. It sets out lots of information like the purpose of the vote, the mandate of the vote. It provides a set of performance indicators by program and related priorities. And just to say that, I mean, this is taken from the budget of basic education in South Africa. And if you ask South Africans in the National Treasury, what form of budgeting do you do? They will say program-based budgeting. But that program-based budget contains a fairly extensive non-financial information related to performance, right? And you can see some of those indicators there linked to the program, how it's linked to the medium-term strategic framework, and then gives at least 7, it will show the audited performance, the estimated performance for a particular year, and then sets out the medium-term targets. And then just in terms of the program, so here there's a program that is called Teachers, Education, Human Resources, and Institutional Development. And it sets out the objectives of this program and also the sub-programs that are located within that particular program. Right? And one is able to see how those sub-programs in the way that they describe feed into the objectives and the purpose of the program. And then also very usefully, it sets out the past 3 years audited outcome, the adjusted appropriation, some average growth figures, and then the medium-term estimate. And the other thing that also came out in the video when the video referred to medium-term expenditure frameworks was the credibility of the outer year estimates, right? So I think where a program is promising to achieve something in the outer years, and the outer year estimates have been revealed in the budget, that those outer year estimates need to matter, so that they can over time build up a credibility. Because if a government is going to promise to extend a child support grant to children from ages 6 to 9, and extend that to children from ages 10 to 12, but to only do that in the 2nd or the 3rd year of the medium-term expenditure framework, the estimates that are revealed in the budget here needs to be credible in order for the public to believe that is indeed what government is going to achieve. Okay, so just go quickly through some of the key challenges. The first is an administrative challenge, and this is about alignment of existing organizational structures in the public sector to the PBB framework. And as I said, you're going to have to now identify the program managers, and those program managers are going to be part of the staff of your ministries. So the person who is responsible for that teacher development and training program is going to be located in the Ministry of Education. And the person's going to have the functional title, at least, of being a program manager, who is going to be preparing the plan and the budget for the program, and is going to be held accountable for the performance of that program. And that's why we coined this phrase, let the manager manage, but hold the manager accountable, right? So those administrative challenges are going to have to be tackled. Then there's the human challenges. And I think this is about the fact that we've routinely ignored or underestimated this kind of human challenge relative to the technical component or components of the reform, right? And I think it's not only program-based budgeting, it applies to the rollout of a standard chart of accounts. It also applies to the rollout of a medium-term expenditure framework, where we try to get the technical aspects right, but we fail to, let me not say fail, but we ignore some of those human aspects where a mindset change is going to be required. I mean, by the time we introduce these reforms, many public officials would have been in their jobs for 10 years, 14 years, right? And all that time they were doing line item budgeting, as shown in the video or Corma's quest. We now need that mindset change to embark on program-based budgeting. And then there are some new culture changes. So more work is required in calculating a new culture in the budget scrutiny process. So it's not just the Ministry of Finance that's going to be approving all expenditure. It is now the program manager that is going to be approving expenditure against a program. And then just moving forward, some more considerable emphasis will need to be placed on the reporting and evaluation challenges. And I think this is going to come out in Rahima's presentation, where countries are thinking of, using program-based budgeting as a base to move to performance-based budgeting in order for that to be successful, and to make performance-based budgeting count in terms of performance informing allocations. That will have to be based on thorough evaluation of the performance of the program, right? And just as we've looked across the African continent, the reports that we've done in taking snapshot, but also in looking at specific countries, the experience on the continent suggests that countries must be modest in their approach and incorporate lots of iteration and continuous adaptation of their reform strategy. Some of when I came to the National Treasury in South Africa, there were a lot of senior managers that if you were to ask them or ask us, does South Africa do program-based budgeting? The response that you'd often get is, yeah, we do a type of program-based budgeting. And the reason for that is that, the program-based budgeting that you have has gone through lots of iterations and lots of adaptation. And that's certainly what I would advise to many countries that are thinking about program-based budgeting, that are in the stage of designing and even facing some implementation challenges, that do allow yourself, an opportunity for experimentation, and ultimately you will get it right. And then just lastly, some key priorities for program-based budgeting reform in Africa. Very importantly, we have to foster country ownership in government and parliament of this reform. It is a comprehensive reform. It cannot simply be delivered by a technical advisor that is going to be flying in for 3 to 6 months. That may be important as well. But what must be worked on is country ownership in government and parliament. Because if it is only a technical reform that the Ministry of Finance presents to Parliament, it is likely that Parliament is going to throw it back at you and say, you know, we don't know what these programs are. We don't know where the specific allocations and money is being spent. So go back and tell us how much you are going to be spending on fuel. Yeah. So there has to be buy-in. You do need a very clear and coherent implementation strategy, and that probably needs to be backed up by a committee, a cross-sectional committee that leads the reform. And that committee cannot just be located in the Ministry of Finance. You're going to need officials from some of the big spending ministries, education, health, public works, etc., that need to be part of this committee. You're going to have to work on building the capacity to implement, whether it is program-based budgeting or performance and program-based budgeting, and also look at how it aligns with the wider public sector reforms. So how does somebody now in the education ministry start to think of themselves as a program manager, and what are the requisite skills that come along with that? The person might never have dealt with budgets and spending plans and approving expenditure within a particular framework before. That person's going to have to develop some of those skills as well. And then taking on that responsibility, right, which is going to have to include appointing budget program managers. And these are the people that are sitting in your line ministries. As Matthew says, this reform aims to strengthen that alignment between planning and the budget process, but that has to mean something, right? Where that plan is being prepared by your MDAs as a bottom up, but where there is a budget process that involves a decision that has been taken on the fiscal framework, which is your top down, and then being able to meet each other at a point where an affordable budget is then presented, where you are promising things located within programs that you have sufficient funds for. And then maybe last but never least is use appropriate performance information that aligns with the budget, right? I mean, there's always this temptation to have as many performance indicators as you possibly can. Now, the thing about performance indicators is that the more performance indicators you have, the fewer performance indicators you are measuring, right? So start to think about the ones that matter, the ones that are the most appropriate, and start with fewer than too many. And this, I think, applies when countries are embarking on a piloting of program-based budgeting. And then there is a last one, and then also, I mean, last and final last is consideration to the evaluation of budget programs, because if this is not worked on, then you're going to run into difficulties when you start to implement or transition from program-based budgeting to performance-based budgeting. And maybe this is something that Rahima can also touch on, sort of, how confident were they in the performance indicators as the country transitions from program-based budgeting to performance-based budgeting. Okay, thank you very much. And I hope I managed to stay within the time that was allocated to me. But yeah, I mean, if there is still time for questions, I can certainly take some questions now. If not, then we're going to go straight over to Joanna. But maybe let me get an indication from Joanna with regard to the time, because I don't want to sort of, break too much into her session.
Matthew, I would maybe go over back to you. I think there's a couple of questions perhaps we could take.
Okay, but how much time do we have before we get into your session, Joanna?
We're a little bit short on time, but perhaps we could take one or two questions. I see that Claude Kasonka has a question. What are the key differences between output-based budgeting and PBB? Are they the same? In the Zambia budget, budgeting is done for each clearly defined program and sub-program with performance indicators and clear mandates of spending entities, and it's output-based budgeting. Also, from your experiences, what challenges are imminent in moving PBB to subnational levels with devolved functions? So just a question here, and perhaps we'll touch on some of these as well during the presentations or the inputs we'll have from countries this morning.
So as we were, sometimes I say to people that I try not to get too bogged down with definitions of some of these things, right? So I mean, if we think about, we have medium-term expenditure frameworks, we have medium-term budget frameworks, we have medium-term fiscal frameworks, and maybe several other different names that essentially is attempting to describe a budget that is prepared over a longer horizon, in most cases 3 years. And as I said, for program-based budgeting in South Africa, for instance, there's a lot of performance information in the program-based budgeting, but very few people, if any, will refer to performance-based budgeting in South Africa. We would just call it program-based budgeting. And as we were introducing program-based budgeting in South Africa, there was lots of talk about output-based budgeting. And we in particularly looked at the New Zealand model, where at the time it was a very strict contracting for the achievement of clear outputs, where your ministry was allocated a budget and your ministry could then contract services from both the public and the private sector to achieve a set number of outputs. But if we think about outputs, when program-based budgeting contains outputs, which are often what the program is meant to achieve and has been given funds for. So if we think of an output as administering vaccines, for instance, right? It's something that can be measured, it's something that can be budgeted for, it's something you can put somebody in charge of, make somebody responsible for. And then your outcome, which then requires some other inputs from some other departments, maybe education as well, is then about achieving a degree of immunization against very particular types of diseases, right? And sometimes it's quite good to think of motor vehicles, right? So I mean, the output of the Toyota factory is to produce a Toyota, right? And obviously according to certain specs and safety standards. But Toyota has very little influence over the accident rate in a country, because that is now also dependent on the road conditions, the skills of drivers, the driver in the Toyota,
I think we lost Neil. There might be a connectivity issue on his side. While he reconnects, Joanna, perhaps we can carry on with the conversation while waiting for Neil to join us again.
Yes, it seems that connectivity is really trying to keep us to time. So perhaps we can move on to the next part of this session, which is really to get country experiences on the implementation of program-based budgeting. And if there is any questions for Neil or other, you can also put them on the chat and we can carry on the conversation through that. But in any case, thank you very much, Matthew, for your introductory words on this. And thank you very much, Neil, for your reflections on the implementation of program-based budgeting on the continent. As you said, this is not a new reform. Already 10 years ago, 80%, more than 80% of countries in the continent had already committed to or were implementing program-based budgeting. And so this is a reform that has been around for a long time. And there has been some challenges in ensuring that the PBB fully delivers on the intended results. So the question that we have now is, where are we now? What has been working? What hasn't been working so well? And what lessons can we take forward from this? And for that, I'd like to invite to this virtual roundtable 4 country representatives who will share some insights about 10 minutes. So first, I'd like to invite Samuel Kiru, who is the Director of Planning at the National Treasury and Planning in Kenya. I'd also like to invite Dr. Kondwane Sute, who is the Director of Finance at the National Local Government Finance Committee in Malawi. I'd also like to invite Rahima Nabutebi, the Head of the National Budget at the Ministry of Finance, Economy and Planning in Rwanda. And finally, Paulina Mulovo, who is a Social Policy Specialist for Unicef Mozambique. Welcome everyone. And without further ado, I'll turn to Samuel to share a few reflections on this, particularly in the Kenya context, where program-based budgeting was first introduced in around 2013 and required a significant transition from line item to program-based budgeting. So what has been working and what hasn't been working so well? Samuel, over to you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Joanna, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are connecting from. My name's Samuel Kilo. I'm from Kenya, and I'm the Director of Planning here at the National Treasury. And I wish to thank CABRI for inviting us to this forum to share our experience in terms of how our country has been implementing program and performance-based budgeting. And I think this is the appropriate forum because we run from us and we also run from other countries in terms of what they are doing. Because of time, I think I'll go straight into the issues. And I'll start by just giving a background as to when and what was the motivation of us starting program and performance-based budgeting, and what has happened in between from when we started to where we are now. And I will start by tracing the program-based budget reforms in 2008-2009 financial year. That's when we started the reforms on program-based budgeting. And why we were starting with the reforms,
Samuel, I think we lost you for a little bit, but I think you're back. Just don't forget to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I think there was it could have been some kind of network issues. We were starting on this type of reform so that we are able to align expenditures with the results that we expect the government to achieve in terms of what we expect to deliver to the citizens of the country. And when we started in 2008, 2009, we started on a pilot basis, or what we used to call indicative program-based budget. Why we were doing that? At that time, we realized that the legal framework that was there then was not supportive of the program-based budgeting. So there were some things that needed to be specifically done in terms of the legal framework to allow the introduction of program-based budget. And within that period that we are doing the indicative program-based budgeting, we embarked on capacity building, because this was a new approach to budgeting, and we actually had to do something. And our major task was actually to start on capacity building in terms of now also bringing the new terms, bringing the new issues to the officers in ministries, departments, and agencies, so that they are able to prepare a program-based budget. So down the line, I think we did the indicate program-based budget all the way until the year 2012, 2013. But in 2010, the Constitution of Kenya was changed, and this gave way also to changing the public finance laws. And one of the laws that was changed was the Public Finance Management Act 2012. And in the Public Finance Management Act 2012, it required specifically that ministries, departments, and agencies, both at national level and at what you'd call county level. I think some countries would call these provincial or municipal levels. So the law specifically required that we prepare program-based budgets. It was specifically indicated in the law. And Parliament was to appropriate budget in terms of programs. So we had to start this at both the national and at the county government. And it went on well. But of course, there were some challenges, because like budgets are supposed to be approved by members of parliament. And members of parliament were used to approving budget in the old way, in the line item budgets. And of course, it took time for them to also understand that now this is the new way. They have to approve the budget, and it has to be in programs. They have to focus not on line items that for spending, but also to focus on what is we expect a ministry, department, or agency to achieve or to do to achieve its objectives. So it took quite a bit of time. And of course, also the new concept was also took a little bit of time to be understood across government. And since then, I think we have been making gradual improvements. We have been able to see the program-based budget automated, because our budget is prepared in IFMIS. We had also now to automate the program-based budget so that we eliminated the manual processes in terms of processing the budget, and that has been done. We had to do a few changes in terms of our chart of accounts. The chart of accounts, I think, was one of the areas we had to reform so that it is consistent with the way of doing program-based budget. Then we have to do a number of other things that included now continuing with the capacity building of line ministries, because as we prepare program-based budget, I think if I now go to the structure required that the ministry, department, or agency, the first thing it has to do, it has to show us what is its mission, what is its vision, and in line with that vision, what has happened in the recent past in terms of what it wanted to do and what it has achieved, and why it is requiring resources in terms of what it expects to achieve in the coming years. So that structure required ministries now to prepare programs with objectives. And tied with those objectives, each ministry now has to clearly show what are the outputs expected in a particular program, what are the outcomes expected in terms of a longer period, and what are the performance indicators. And performance indicators, we find that these now we have to look at it from the perspective of whether they are input indicators, which of course initially a number of ministries were focusing on input indicators, but we had to also advise them over time to move to output and outcome kind of indicators. And since we also do the budget in terms of a medium-term perspective, we also have to have targets put in form of a medium-term perspective. So the budget, the structure would contain the programs, the outputs, performance indicators, and the targets for the medium term. So that has been done, and we have been implementing, and Parliament has actually been approving budget in that form. That notwithstanding, I think we have had a challenge, because the challenge has actually now to integrate the budgets that we prepare with the monitoring and evaluation. Because at the end of the day, once budgets are prepared, budgets have to be implemented. But at the end of it all, somebody has to do monitoring and evaluation. So the government created what we call central planning and project monitoring units across all ministries, departments, and agencies. And these units now are responsible for monitoring and evaluation of the program-based budgets. We have not been able to do that on a quarterly basis, but on an annual basis, we do what we call program performance reviews. But we want to go quarterly so that monitoring and evaluation of programs are also monitored on a quarterly basis. So we are still, there are still some challenges in terms of linking program and performance-based budgeting with the monitoring and the evaluation. So that has been the progress that we have achieved. There are other areas that we have also worked on in terms of integrating now projects into programs, and I think that is ongoing. So we are still focusing on more further reforms, and I think that's the much I can say in terms of what we have been able to achieve here in Kenya and how we are going to move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I think you highlighted really the need for kind of a longer term, flexible and adaptive reform that really takes into account and builds a lot on the capabilities of different stakeholders that are involved in the reform. And this is obviously sector-wide. So you've obviously been working not just with sector ministries to strengthen the preparation and implementation of program budgets, but also parliamentarians, as you mentioned, who now have to approve this budget into programs and basically exercise their oversight function as such. So thank you very much, Samuel, for these very interesting insights. And if you have any questions, I strongly encourage you to drop them on the chat. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Kondwane from Malawi, who is going to share some insights now on the implementation of program-based budgeting at a local level, something that started and 2017, 2018. And it's obviously an important step that many countries are now embarking on as a step further in the rollout of PBB reforms. Because obviously, if you want to explore the full benefits of PBB reforms, then the local governments play an important role in the delivery of public services and the delivery of outputs. And so this has been sort of the next step in PBB reform implementation. So I'd like to invite Dr. Kondwane. Dr. Kondwane, we have your presentation. Just give a cue to Priya whenever you want to change slides.
Good morning. Actually, I think there's a change there. Instead of Dr.
Thank you very much.
Hello. I think we have two people speaking, Dr. Kondwane or Yohane. Dr. Kondwane?
Okay. Thank you, Joan. I would Yohane Nyanja is the one going to make a finance committee. However, I just want to give a preamble in the sense that yes, in Malawi,
I think we have some issues getting Dr. Kondwane. Perhaps, Yohane, if you're going to provide us with a presentation, I'll hand it over to you, and maybe Dr. Kondwane can come at the end.
All right, thank you so much. I hope I'm being heard.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
All right. I see the presentation that was already sent to you has been put on the screen, so maybe we can just follow using that one. So the presentation is outlined as follows. It has areas where we feel like main achievements so far, but also have challenges that we have countered from the councils and the challenges that have emanated from the center, and we have put some lessons learned and the way forward. So this is a perspective of local government authorities towards PBB. It's not necessarily the perspective of the national the national level PBB. So I have heard these other presentations from the previous presenters. I think much of it was dwelling on the national level PBB. So in Malawi, we have a decentralized system, which is a one-level local government, and it's made out of 35 councils. And the 35 councils, 28 are rural councils, and the other remaining ones are 4, which are city councils, and the other ones are town councils and the municipal council. So National Local Government Finance Committee, the organizations where I'm coming from, is charged with the oversight function of financial management and development of these 35 local government authorities. So in Malawi, the government introduced the program-based budget by piloting a few ministries in the 2015-2016 fiscal year. Then it rolled out to all the other line ministries in the 2016-2017. However, for the PBB to roll out to the local councils, it happened in the 2017-2018. And now, National Local Government Finance Committee and the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning and Development were the ones who are charged with the design of how the PBB should look like for the local councils, because it has to be adapted from the national level PBB to the local council one. So then the mandate to oversee the PBB rollout, provision of guidelines and support was left in the hands of National Local Government Finance Committee, because National Local Government Finance Committee is the body that coordinates all the budgets for local councils. That's once a budget circular has been issued by the Minister of Finance, then National Local Government Finance Committee is the one that takes it down to the local councils and adapt it to suit the needs and the systems in the local level. Next slide. So the PBB in Malawi is divided, captures policy information and the budget information. So it merges these two. So in the policy, we have issues of mission, the strategic objective, major achievements, program issues, program objectives and outcomes, outputs of the and indicators, and the staffing information. Then we have the budget information, which is the appropriations per program and sub-programs, then the program economic classification, and the budget by cost center, and then the capital budgets. This is more or less the same as I think the previous presenter, was it Neilco was showing us the structure. So this is more like how it is. So more details of the information. We have a mission, which is every local council is supposed to present its PBB, and it shows the mission of that particular local council. And then it also brings out the strategic objectives of that particular local council. Then they spell out the major achievements in the preceding year. Then they also spell out all the program issues that have affected program outcomes in the year that has just ended. Then there is the budget by program, so it shows the program budget by and the sub-programs by each of the programs and the sub-programs that have been earmarked. Then we have the program performance information, it's also clearly outlined. Then the budget issues like budget by economic classification, then cost center budgets. Then we also go on to show the personnel budget. So each council outlines it lists all the personnel that are in that local authority, and it also outlines the salary amounts, the annual salaries that are supposed to be given to these people. So it shows the whole budget in terms of personnel enrollments. Then the last section, which is section 10, shows the capital budgets by projects. So they outline all the projects that the local authority has earmarked for that particular financial year. Then the budget that is attached to it, but they also show us what the other projects that have been going on. Maybe they have been carried over from previous year. So they also indicate those and see how much was spent on those projects in the previous year and how much is going to be spent in the coming year. Next. So I would so far just put maybe two main achievements to PBB at the moment. As you have seen, maybe we are around 5 years since we had started the PBB, but mainly I think what we have achieved is the increased level of transparency and accountability on public expenditure, because PBB has helped to define the priorities, and it has also helped in following up on performance in these councils. So it's from the government level, also from any other stakeholder who may want to get more information about what is going on in the councils in terms of public expenditure, the information that we get through these PBBs do help us to provide information without problems. But it has also provided a platform for improved and evidence-based decision-making for policymakers. So the information is there, so it's something that is helpful. However, we have faced a lot of challenges, and these challenges have been divided into two. There are those emanating from the councils, the local government authorities themselves, and those from the center. So from the local government, we have noticed that the PBB is not fully owned and understood by the council personnel. As such, there are so many capacity challenges in terms of formulation and the reporting of the PBB. Earlier on, I talked about National Local Government Finance Committee and the Ministry of Finance coming up with the design. So what happened was the indicators were defined at the center and they were shared with the local authorities. But it turned out that most of the local authorities felt some of the indicators that we had given them were not relevant to them. Some felt they were not realistic. Some felt that they are difficult to calculate. Some felt they are important indicators that we needed to put, but they are missing. And some even were feeling that some of these are very ambiguous. So it's been a process where we are trying to learn from each other and to adjust. But there is also lack of clarity on how to account for off-budget resources, because at the moment, our PBB is only focusing on resources that come direct from the government. However, in our local government authorities, there are so many other resources which are off-budget coming from the involvement partners and other NGOs, which somehow help achieve some of the outputs. So the councils, the local government authorities have been having problems in terms of segregating which achievement is being attributed to resources from the government or which ones are from the support from elsewhere. Then you see that—
Johanne, 2 minutes left.
All right, fine. So councils, the reports sometimes are not coming and the quality is not also good sometimes. Then we have also realized that the usefulness of this PBB is not greatly being appreciated in the councils because the link between their performance and budget allocation in the subsequent years is not very clear. Next. From the center, we've realized this decentralization process is not yet complete. So there are so many assignments that have been given to councils, yet we have not given them the corresponding resources. And even the resources that go there sometimes are not adequate to carry out the functions that we require the councils to do. So most of the times the money is spent on recurrent spending other than any development or investment. And the period of reporting sometimes differs between the councils and the center. So sometimes we are finding that the reporting problem comes in because of such kind of differences. Next. So what have we learned? We've learned that for a PBB to be successful, there are other external factors that have to be put into place. One, the completion of the decentralization process, but also we also feel like the link between the PBB performance and the future funding of these local councils has to be very clear. Then also the capacity to monitor budget implementation at local level is very important, so that the councils tend to see that the PBB is a serious exercise. Next. And also the inclusiveness when formulating these PBBs. I think we needed to incorporate local level personnel from the start so that they are well capacitated. So I think inclusiveness is also important. And also supporting the local level people in terms of capacity building is also very important. Way forward, I think there's a need for a further continuous review of the PBB template so that we reach to a consensus between the MDAs and the councils. We should also find a way of accounting for the off-budget resources in the PBB so that we get a complete picture. And also the M&E function at the councils needs to be supported in terms of issues of data management, because it's one of the issues that we're also facing. Then obviously continuous capacity building for at the council level, and also make sure that we have a clear link between PBB performance and the level of funding that is provided. Maybe before I finally finish, I should also mention out that we've been working with UNICEF greatly in terms of improvement of the PBB at local level. We have had a lot of support from them. I think that's where my presentation ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yohane. And I think this provides a somewhat a different perspective from the local level of what it means to really fully implement program-based budgeting. The issues around ownership, the issues around capacity remain issues that will persist once program-based budgeting gets rolled out to the local level. And I think this is particularly even more difficult if the decentralization process and the decentralization reform is ongoing, where you still don't have, the full mandate for local governments to be implementing those budgets and to have the necessary resources to implement those budgets. So really great perspectives. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. You also mentioned challenges in terms of the links between program-based budgeting and performance. And I think this ties it really nicely to the next speaker we have, Rahima from Rwanda. And since 2018, there's been a sort of paradigm shift in the way that program-based budgeting is approached, to have a clearer link to performance. So Rahima, I'd just like to invite you to share some reflections on this. What has worked? What was this change in paradigm, and what has been not working so well?
Thank you, Joanna. Good morning to you all. I think I'm not able to show my video, not sure why. It's okay. I think the system has blocked it. But as based on the question you have asked, first of all, I thank Kabli for this opportunity has given us to share our experience. And Joanna has made it clear in the question that we have done a paradigm shift from program-based budgeting to performance-based budgeting. I think those who have already spoken have tried to show what line item budgeting involves, what program-based budgeting involves, and then most of them have mentioned the element of performance, the element of results. We all know that on line item, you're just allocating budget on economic items. And then here you're not able to visibly see or consider government programs, which the entire public is expecting to see. Where do you spend on the resources? And then at the end, when you have those programs, you're able to link your national priorities, which is in form of programs. It's not in form of lines or in form of items. I think that's what has been emphasized so far in the discussions, linking line item, program-based, now going to performance. Everyone has been talking about results. And I would say that in Rwanda, what pushed us to do to make that paradigm shift, it starts from the legal framework. The legal framework, the organic budget law, gives orientation to the ministerial order, and then that ministerial order clearly shows that every chief budget manager has to make sure that focuses on results. The planning should be performance-oriented, the budgeting should be performance-oriented. And that goes straight away to the Supreme Audit Office, the Auditor General. Their audits and form of performance-based budgeting. So that was one of the reasons why we had now to shift, take another step from program-based budgeting to performance budgeting. Now, as implementing the law in Rwanda, we have what we call the homegrown solution of Imihigo performance contracts, starting from His Excellency the President signs a performance contract with the Prime Minister with the ministers, then ministers with the different departments within the ministries. The focus is on performance management. So you could realize that from policy level, the concept of result management was already adopted, but when we go to resource allocation on the figures in there, something would be missing. So that one had to drive us to go for performance-based budgeting. And then again, when you look at, those policies are being implemented through, they are focusing on the national strategy, and as well as the sector-specific strategic plans. When they are designing that, the focus is also on performance. Performance information is clear. Those are planning documents that are in place, that are guiding, but then when you go on the budget, you will not be able to see such performance information, even if somewhere it could be there. Like for now, currently, our IFMIS, the Integrated Financial Management System, it records non-financial performance information and as well as budget information. But then that linkage to make sure that you're able to bring in the non-performance information with the performance information, you find it challenging. And it's because the focus is on program-based budgeting. Then you will know that as I'm done, I'm able to produce a program budget, I'm done. It ends there. But when you go for performance-based budgeting, that means you need to take another step. So you realize that at the policy level, result management has been embraced, and then on the budget, there is a challenge in there. So that one drove us to make sure that we have to link, we have to make everything proper. So we embarked on the journey of performance-based budgeting. And basically, I would say that when we started that, of course, Ministry of Finance would appreciate this one much, bringing something results-oriented. That means you're focusing your resources. That means that you have got a basis to challenge sectors on the allocation of the resources. You don't have much to allocate, but the few you have, you are allocating it appropriately. And then you can even be able to sit on the table as Minister of Finance and justify why you're allocating more resources to agriculture, more resources to healthy, than maybe to either Ministry of Labor or Ministry of IT, things like that. So you are clear there, you have brought performance in there. And then in Rwanda, what we have to make sure that our performance-based budgeting is linked to the strategic guidance. That is the National Strategy for Transformation. From there, it is linked to the sector strategic plan. So we are implementing the National Strategy for Transformation. And that one, what does it show? It shows that you have the entire picture of the nation and you are allocating resources accordingly. And then you're even able to plan through the medium term, because you would say that if I have all these priorities I have in, but then I have a period like a 2025, I have to achieve this, so you're able to plan accordingly with the clear results. At the end, you'll be able to see clear results. So I would say that basically that's what drove us. That's what was the agenda behind for us to start performance-based budgeting. And I would say that so far where we are, and first of all, it started from ownership and appreciating it. So after appreciating it, basically when you look at performance-based budgeting, you realize that all the previous years, you wasted a lot. With performance-based budgeting, everything becomes clear. To the level that you're going to go to the last level where you're allocating resources, you're able to link it to your national strategy or your national development plan. You're able to link it to your sector specific plans. And then from there, you're able to know that the programs I have on budget, these are programs that I have to allocate resources, and they're addressing a challenge which I'm expecting that will stop me to implement or to achieve the results of the sector strategic plan or the national development plan or the national strategy. So that's where the whole linkage. So I would say that with performance-based budgeting, you become transparent, your budget becomes credible, whereby everyone will be able to look at the expected result. Everyone will be able to appreciate, even at the parliament level, even at the sector level. They wouldn't be able maybe to stop that element of, conflicts in allocating resources. You have given me much, you have given the other one less, things like that. So I would say that we have reached at a good stage. We're able to see, and what I would say that why we're able, even every level was able to appreciate, it's that culture of result management. It's already in the system. So it was just the budget that was failing to address that. And some of the challenges, maybe what I would say is that because of the way things were done before, when you bring performance-based budgeting, you are on point, everything there is linkage. That means there is a lot of kind of cleaning you have to do with what you have been doing. The sector strategic plans, you have a lot of cleaning, because when you go there, you may realize the performance information in there. There was no proper diagnosis that was done to appropriately come up with the performance indicators, objectives, targets, and all that. Even the programs to be able to implement a certain program, certain objectives. So I realized that the issue that is happening now is to clean up, is to reorganize everything. And another thing is the IT system, the way the IT system was designed before that linkage of results and programs wasn't proper. So the mapping has to be done. You have to work on the IT system. And then another element of what you have to do is to ensure when you look at it, it's kind of a rigorous exercise, because it's put you at point, and most people are used to quickest way of doing things. So when you don't take them through that diagnosis of challenges, assessment, causes, to allocate resources appropriately, it becomes challenging to them. So that change, you need a lot of course, like a sensitization, a lot of considerations at the sector specific levels. Joanna, that's what I would say regarding this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rahima. Really, really interesting insights from Rwanda in terms of this paradigm shift. And I think you've explained the way that PBB has allowed for improving the allocative decision processes to be more linked to the performance of different programs. But I would also like to appreciate all the work that went into making sure that this was done. So it had to be worked not just at a national level, but also at the sector level, and I guess at an individual level as well, right? To ensure that the managers had the mandate to manage, and that they were held to account in terms of their performance with the performance contracts that were sort of established, and also in terms of just instilling that culture of performance. So I think really insightful points by Rahima. And finally, we're going to turn now to Unicef Mozambique, Paulina Mulovo, who is going to share a short presentation on the introduction of PBB in Mozambique, which is quite a recent one. So Paulina, I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see the presentation and we can hear and see you fine.
Good, excellent. So, okay. Yes, hi everyone. This has been extremely interesting actually hear the other experiences from other countries. In Mozambique, this is very, very new, the whole program-based budget reform. Let's say the rolling out of it, this is the first year, so it has been extremely interesting to hear from the other countries. My presentation is maybe more looking at from the partner point of view, how UNICEF has worked and how we started to work, and also some perceptions that we have had during this time. So just to say that in Mozambique, the preparation of program-based budget has taken about 10 years. And it's led by Ministry of Economy and Finance with the support of technical body, Center of Finance and Information System, which is kind of, it is a very technical body who concentrates more on the IT system and building the IT system. So during these 10 years, apart from the overall philosophy, etc., that the government has been developing, they actually developed quite detailed system or IT system, which was mainly based on the National Medium-Term Development Plan, the 5-year plan. So 10 years, we even us as partners, we have been always like, what's happening with the program-based budget? But a very strong push happened 2020. When the minister himself of Economy and Finance said that this has to be now done. We have to roll out this reform. And so it showed a very strong political leadership. And that's, I would say, when things really started to happen. At the same time, there was a very important law which was passed, I think it was in the end of last year. It's the SISTAF law, is the let's say the main PFM law of the country, which was revised, and it really built this new PBB system. And at the same time, there's now currently there is a PFM policy, or let's say strategy. It's in making. So all this kind of the push from the political leadership and also the legal framework, as well as the PFM strategy, are clearly important issues here, how this has gone forward. 2021, so this was the first year that somehow the planning system was rolled out. It has been somewhat cumbersome. I have to say that the government has done huge efforts to really make this happen. And we will know a little bit later more about the lessons learned of this first cycle of planning using this new format. And it's also important to say another, it maybe goes to the policy reforms. So, and which has also had some challenges in rolling out of this program-based budget in Mozambique, is that there is a long-term development plan in making also, which was pending for some time. And that was kind of the framework where the whole program-based budget was supposed to be, should be aligned with that long-term development plan. And as it wasn't approved, so there were some moments of how do we go forward with this now. So actually, right now they are developing this long-term development plan until 2042, and then there has to be some adjustment made. Let's see if I manage to get the next slide. And I don't go maybe to this slide so much. This is very much why the objectives of the reform for efficient, effective and transparent plans and budgets. But maybe to highlight here, one of the key issues that Mozambique's planning and budgeting system has been criticized for a long time is that the plans and budgets don't really talk with each other. And this was one of the key issues that the government also really pushed to align the plan and budget as to one instrument. And also the aim, which is still in process, is to have the plans in the form of programs in the central and decentral level, and so forth. But I don't go more here because I think this is very much what is happening with the objectives in any country. So our support as UNICEF, so we have worked already with the Minister of Economy and Finance for quite some time, mainly in the area of transparency. And as this was, we wanted to also shift our work more on efficiency. We started to have a conversation with Minister of Economy and Finance when they were also having this kind of stronger push to implement this, how we could support. So basically, we started a conversation with the Minister of Economy and Finance and saying, where would you need at this point, where would you specifically need some support? And of course, from UNICEF point of view, we are very interested in services for children. So the government then, they have been developing, they were developing a program portfolio of the whole program structure of the government plans. And they said, listen, we have done this, we have a draft, but we think there would be much to improve in this portfolio. So maybe we could look at that. So that's where we started, and that was the first part, to really take the portfolio, what they have done, and revise it and assess it and look the quality and do some specific recommendations to that portfolio. We looked at the logical structure of the portfolio. We looked at the quality of indicators of the in this one, and we specifically, the government also wanted to ensure that this portfolio would be aligned also with SDGs. So first part was this assessment, and then we moved after that the government looked at the key findings of the assessment. We went to the clinics, and with this, let's say there were some specific sectors, for example, where we found more, let's say, weaker structure, and which also showed perhaps the understanding of results-based management, and also different type of indicators, like what are results indicators and what are maybe output level indicators, etc. So we started to work with sectors. We joined, we had some clinics, workshops where we had the sectors, we had also UNICEF staff participating, and we have MEF always there, as well as the Ministry of Economy and Finance, as well as the technical body. So these were very they were very enlightening and good clinics, because you would really go and see and really discuss what are the priority indicators, and ensure that the sectors also see that the logic makes sense, and the indicators also that they want to be looking at are also priorities for the country. Of course, from UNICEF point of view, we were working a lot with those indicators which look at the child well-being. So we also try to ensure that some of those indicators are there. And what I really want to, and I don't take more time here, but what I really want to highlight here is that the whole program structure had some transversal programs, but one of the key issues in Mozambique is the stunting of children. So we have had now is around 38% of under 5 are stunted, the children. So we really discussed with the government that we really need to work with this nutrition programming and ensure that this also would be included as a transversal program to this portfolio also. And here we also brought on board with our nutrition colleagues, with the support of our nutrition colleagues, we brought the coordinating body of the nutrition, who did the proposal of the program for nutrition. So that was a very, let's say, I think that was a good example for us of something very practical and concrete with us, but we did. Other areas that we worked, of course, was that when the SISTAF law, this PFM law came out, we also commented it, and we tried to see, the MEF handed it to the PFM working group, and we all commented, but from our point of view, it was really to see that some of the assessment recommendations were also included in the SISTAF law. And also, for example, in M&E, our M&E colleagues also were looking at specifically that level, as well as the subnational area. So we commented quite much, and many were included to the law. Other area what the government asked us is to support support this document, which would join the budget and plan document, the PSOE, so-called in Mozambique. And we have done this kind of model plan, which is basing on the international best practices, and also some PEFA recommendations and OBS, Open Budget Survey recommendations. So we have this kind of model budget and plan document, which they see it as they can gradually take areas there to this new document. We supported also the training of trainers in central and decentral level, also simulations that the government was doing. This was quite big exercise. Many training sessions were done with the technical body, so we were more kind of financing it. We also work with the parliament, and we have tried to ensure that the parliament is also aware of what is happening with this reform. So what we have included, for example, with our plan with the Minister of Economy and Finance, is that they actually have sessions with the parliament to say where we are now. And also, when we work with the parliament, we try to also explain a little bit why this reform is so important, because this is a change management, so it takes some time. We are also starting to work. There's one subsystem in this program-based budget, which is the M&E reform, like an M&E system reform. So we are also there now working very closely with the government. And what we really want to do, and what we are committed, because we are for this, is really to working together, because this is such huge reform, and we also believe that when we work together and when we support each other and we learn while we are doing, we really want to ensure that there are moments of reflection for the government and the users' point of view. So what we are starting to do is each year after this cycle of the planning, using this new format, there is a moment that the users can say what they felt was good and what they felt they would need more. That this would be done in central and also in a couple of, not in all provinces, it's impossible at this moment, but at least in some provinces, so that there's understanding of what is still missing from the user's point of view, and then the support can be better directed to that. Some achievements, I think we are quite proud of the government, and our model is not completely there yet, but they did do this state plan and budget. They did form one document this year, and this is quite revolutionary in Mozambique. There's still, of course, much to improve in the document itself, but it is an important step, and we really have been congratulating the government from this. The model portfolio, the work that was done with that was a long time work. We had months of meetings and discussions. The portfolio itself did improve significantly, and it also had this inclusion of the nutrition program to this model portfolio. As said, it's not yet fully, rolled out completely, because there is this long-term development plan in making currently. So this is kind of this, we are also trying to see how this long-term development plan and the portfolio can also work. Let's say the portfolio can maybe contribute to some indicators, key indicators in the long-term development plan. We also see that it's so important to take time and explain what is this, like the results-based management, the knowledge of results-based management in different levels. Very important to take time and really have trainings, but also have that dialogue and discussion with the government and with these planners in different levels. Achievements, of course, is the trainings in different levels, as said, and also what we are trying to do, because the donor, partner coordination, it's not very strong here. So what we found out, for example, we're working in one province and suddenly someone other also is working in this program-based budget, some other partner. So what we started to do is we tried now to coordinate also and have a really working group of partners interested, who are working or who are interested in working in program-based budget, the rollout. We are having these kind of meetings between us to better understand who is doing what, and also to have a dialogue with the Minister of Economy and Finance to discuss how we can best support as partners, not only UNICEF, but all different partners, because this is such huge reform, it does not make sense us to duplicate. So we really want to, like, this has been UNICEF role really to push for this kind of better coordination of partners. And lastly, just the lessons learned. We see the program-based budget as a critical part of the overall budget finance management reform, and it requires a lot of time, long-term efforts, and really partnership of working together and walking together with the government. So it's really what we see is that it has to be commitment from the government, but also from the partners, that we are committed to work together on this. And we also, in Mozambique, perhaps with this strong political push, there was a lot of push to really to do everything immediately. And of course, this brings a lot of problems, because we have these other reforms also. We have decentralization reform, very complex one ongoing, and we have also the long-term development plan in making. So just maybe that let's take time, let's take this gradually, let's take step by step and improve and assess and see where we can do better. So I think this is something that really consciously to assess and adjust, and also to ensure that it's not only technical approach, it's not only the IT system. It's really important to have a vision of the government, where you want to go with this. And here the political leadership is so important, and the ownership of the, not only MEF, but also the sectors. And what we learned is, and this will take time, and we really see that this is important, that there needs to be strong engagement of all sectors. We can't just send a consultant to do along the work. There has to be engagement, there has to be dialogue, there have to be discussion specifically, even like, let's say, to have those very technical notes, to discuss them really well with the sectors. And there have been beautiful moments where the sectors have been really defending their indicators and defending their, programs, and it's something that is really nice to see. And of course, with them also the capacity building component and really assistant and on-job training. So not only workshops, but really when you are working, how we can support this better. So this is also something that we want to move toward more and more. I said also the high level buying. And where also we would like to go more, we understood during this time, is that we can do the indicators, but we also need to know, and all the program portfolio, but we need to know how to monitor this. So this is also somewhere where we are now moving towards a bit more, is to strengthen the monitoring and evaluation system, and it's in this SysDef law is a subsystem. So this is really an area that we will be working. Again, not alone, there are other actors, so we want to have our niche quite clearly. Lessons learned, extremely important, the coordination, not only between the government, like in different actors, the government, the MEF role, and communication with different sectors is extremely important, and it should be really put a lot of effort on that, and that's something that is really we want to do, but really focused, not anymore in general, but really focused in the future. But also the partners, there's enough to do for all of us, so we shouldn't be duplicating. We should be quite clear and see which are our each partner's strengths, and how we work together with the government on which areas, so that we can really build the system together instead of coming from different corners to this. Yes, I think that's all from now. Thank you. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Paulina. Thank you so much for these insights in terms of the support you've been providing to the government of Mozambique to introduce program-based budgeting. I think some of these challenges are recurrent across many of the countries. And I think, it has been sort of identified that many of the PBB reforms successes have been particularly important at the planning stages in terms of the preparation of the budgeting programs and the tabling of the budgeting programs. The implementation, though, has been a bit more difficult, particularly in terms of monitoring the performance of the programs and evaluating the performance of those programs. So I think those challenges are sort of shared. So unfortunately, we come at the end of our time. There are a few questions on the chat, and I think we could perhaps continue this conversation offline. There will be a sort of room document that will be shared with the sort of reflections that we've had here today. Perhaps what I would do is maybe highlight one or two questions that were emphasized quite a bit by participants, and perhaps Matthew and Neil can reflect on that in their concluding remarks. I think there was particularly an important question around the sort of administrative challenges that PBB reforms entail. So we had a question from Bob in terms of if Neil, you could elaborate a bit on the administrative challenges, specifically, do we need staff or create new departments and units in order to implement PBB? So what are the administrative challenges that it poses? And we had another question as well from Fuzi Libete from Lesotho. So in case where we have different departments forming one program, who should be the program manager of that program? So again, comes back to the administrative challenge, organizational challenge that PBB reforms can pose. So perhaps Neil or Matthew, there could be a reflection on that during the concluding remarks. And there is another question from Hairulu Malikov, I think from Tanzania, which I think can be sort of an overarching conclusion as well from Matthew and Neil in terms of the documented evidence and benefits of BBB compared with an incremental budgeting in terms of enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of public spending. So I think those two kind of overarching questions for us, and then if there was any questions that we didn't respond, we'll attempt to do that in the room document that will be distributed after the event. Thank you so much, everyone, for your inputs, and particularly the presenters, Samuel, Johanne, Rahima, and Paulina, for your inputs. And I'll give the floor back to Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. That was a really rich session that we had, with so many insights on how these 4 country experiences had designed and implemented program-based budgeting with some similar challenges across the countries, but also some unique challenges. So those are interesting questions around the administrative challenges and what it involves, and then more specific questions around, so what if different functions merge into one? Who is the program manager? So let me answer those by saying that we do need to think very carefully of the context, and we do need to think very carefully as to what it is that we are attempting to achieve with the introduction of program-based budgeting. That it's not just about the technical, it is certainly not just about the template. I mean, program-based budgeting is about improving the alignment between those priority plans, how the budget is prepared, how the budget is spent, and how the budget is evaluated, and how that evaluation then feeds into budget decisions that are taken with regard to the allocations to the program. So my advice would be, look, do not think too much about what program-based budgeting is going to be, it will look like, before fully understanding what your context requires and what is required in order to address the challenge that you are taking on. So I like this approach that is being taken by UNICEF, where the support that is provided to countries is at a country level, because Lesotho is going to throw up its own set of challenges, Botswana is going to, etc., etc. Right? So do think carefully about the context. I mean, think about, and this is going to be my closing remarks, think about what Rahima said about the political support for results management and the ability of the country to think of program-based budgeting, look at how the plan informs the budget, and then think about what it is that you need to achieve in terms of your very strong politically supported results framework that has enabled the country to make that transition from program-based budgeting to performance-based budgeting. I would argue that there are very few countries that are at that stage to take that step towards performance-based budgeting. What we need to focus on is getting program-based budgeting right. So to sort out those programs, make sure that those programs are aligned to the plans, that there's a sensible budget allocation to the programs and sub-programs, and that there is spending according to the allocation in the program. And that where evaluation happens, that the spending to the programs have remained within the rules and the amounts appropriated, and that there's some evaluation that can take place. I think once that is in place, the country can certainly build on that foundation as you move towards performance-based budgeting. Thank you very much, Joe. And I think let me just then hand over to, I suppose, my co-host, Matthew Cummins. Matthew?
Thanks so much, Neil, as well as to Joanna and the presenters from Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, and Rwanda. I thought it was a fantastic discussion and learned a ton. Going back to the start, I think it was very humbling just to acknowledge that program-based budgeting, this idea, was born more than 50 years ago, yet it feels still so new and fresh, especially in this region. But I think one of the big positive takeaways from my side at least was really how governments are trying to view PBB not just as a public finance reform, but trying to implement and view it as an overall public management tool and approach. And this is across the entirety of the budget cycle, making those important connections to the politics vis-a-vis the parliament, as we heard specifically from Kenya and Mozambique. So that's great. As Neil just reinforced, I think there were a lot of very common challenges that resonated very strongly across the case studies. That's from generating real ownership to all of the administrative bottlenecks, as well as the human resource capacity constraints. And I think Neil's just quick guidance right now about understanding the context and letting the context direct the evolution of this. That's, I think, some very sage advice. One of the points I really appreciated was on the complexities of off-budget funding, which play a very important role in most of our country context. And this was highlighted in the case of Malawi. But I think also this really shines the light on the benefit of program-based budgeting as a powerful tool to really boost transparency and accountability. And I think Rwanda also acknowledged the many benefits in that space, which I also found very enlightening. Lastly, just from a partner perspective, I know that CABRI and UNICEF on different levels were supporting many of your governments to introduce and kind of refine this reform process as it moves forward. And just to say that we exist solely to help you tackle your own challenges. So please continue to rely on us. We exist to serve and to help. So we'll look forward to following up with you, hopefully in most of these contexts that were present today. In conclusion, I just want to once again thank everybody so much on behalf of CABRI and UNICEF for your participation, for your contributions to a very rich and lively discussion. I hope you've taken away some great insights, as I have, and hopefully we'll look forward to interacting with you in a future discussion sometime soon. So with that, wishing you a fantastic rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.